The grand chamber of the Cosmic Council stretched impossibly high, its crystalline walls pulsing with the collective heartbeats of 1,000 subjugated worlds. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the center of the circular platform, her simple black suit a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and exotic forms surrounding her. Beside her, Admiral Marcus Torres kept his hands clasped behind his back, his weathered face betraying nothing, as the council members whispered among themselves in languages that predated human civilization. Above them, the 13 rulers of the galaxy sat upon thrones carved from the bones of extinct species. Their forms were varied, some humanoid, others writhing masses of tentacles or geometric crystalline structures that hurt to look at directly. But their expressions, regardless of anatomy, shared the same condescending amusement. "So," rumbled Overlord Vexhay, his voice echoing through translator implants embedded in every conscious being in the chamber. The massive reptilian figure leaned forward, each of his 4 eyes focusing on the humans below. "The children of Earth have finally come to beg." Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "We haven't come to beg, Overlord. We've come to offer you a chance for genuine peace." A sound like breaking glass filled the chamber, the Zephyrian Council members' equivalent of laughter. "Peace? Little human, your species has been at war with our forces for exactly 47 of your years. In that time, you have lost 237 colony worlds. Your home system is blockaded. Your population has been reduced by 60%. The crystalline being's voice turned sharp. "What could you possibly offer us that we cannot simply take?" Admiral Torres spoke for the first time, his gravelly voice cutting through the chamber's acoustics. "Respect." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Several council members shifted uncomfortably on their thrones. It had been millennia since anyone had spoken to them with such directness. "Respect?" Overlord Vexhay's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "You would speak of respect while your fleets burn in the void? While your people huddle in underground shelters, eating recycled protein and breathing recycled air?" Sarah pulled out a small datapad, its surface gleaming.
"We know about the servant worlds, Overlord."
All of them. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. The gentle humming of the Council's various life support systems became suddenly audible in the silence. "We know about the breeding programs on Kelos Prime," Sarah continued, her voice never wavering. "How you've spent 3,000 years selectively breeding the Kilosai for maximum efficiency in your mining operations. We know about the neural inhibitors you've implanted in every Vraxian child for the past 5 centuries, ensuring they can never develop beyond the mental capacity of a 12-year-old human." "Enough," hissed Councillor Morthak, a writhing mass of tentacles whose species had once been poets and philosophers before the Council's arrival.
"You know nothing of the complexities of galactic governance."
"We know about the harvest," Torres said quietly. If the chamber had been cold before, it now felt like the vacuum of space itself.
The Council members' various breathing apparatus, environmental suits, and psionic emanations all seemed to still at once. Sarah activated her datapad, and holographic displays sprang to life around the chamber. Star charts, shipping manifests, communication logs. Every 73 years, you systematically depopulate entire worlds. You tell the survivors it's plague, or resource depletion, or natural disaster. But we've tracked the patterns, the ships that arrive just before each catastrophe. The sudden spikes in Council military recruitment immediately afterward. You harvest sentient species like crops, Torres added. And you've been doing it for over 10,000 years. The silence stretched until Overlord Vaxhay finally spoke. "Even if such accusations held any truth, which they do not, what would you propose to do about it? Your species lacks the military might to threaten even one of our outer systems, let alone our core worlds." Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. It was not a pleasant expression. "We're not threatening you with our military might, Overlord. We're offering you a chance to avoid something much worse. And what could be worse than war? Truth." The words seemed to echo strangely in the vast chamber. Several of the Council members exchanged glances through their various sensory organs. "Tomorrow morning, at exactly 08000 Galactic Standard Time, we will begin broadcasting. Every communication array we've built, every hidden relay station, every sleeper ship we've sent to the dark corners of the galaxy, they all carry the same message. Complete documentation of the Council's crimes against every species in this galaxy. Councillor Ethmori, whose species communicated through complex pheromone releases, suddenly filled the air with the sharp scent of fear. The servant species are conditioned not to rebel. Their neural modifications prevent them from rebelling against direct commands, Sarah interrupted. But they don't prevent them from understanding truth when it's presented properly. We've spent 40 years studying your control methods. We know how to work around them. Admiral Torres stepped forward. Every world you've subjugated, every species you've broken, every population you've harvested, they're all going to learn what really happened to their people at the same time, across the entire galaxy. But we're not unreasonable, Sarah continued. We're prepared to offer you an alternative. Full amnesty for past crimes. A genuine peace treaty based on mutual respect and the sovereignty of all sentient species. The establishment of a truly representative galactic government where every world has a voice. Overlord Vexai's massive form shifted on his throne. And if we refuse, then tomorrow morning 13 billion worlds learn that their gods bleed. The sound that emerged from the council was unlike anything the chamber's acoustic systems had been designed to handle. A cacophony of rage, fear, and desperate calculation from 13 different species, all trying to speak at once. Silence! Vexai's roar shook dust from the ancient walls. You would destroy the order that has kept this galaxy stable for millennia. Without the Council's guidance, these species would tear each other apart within a generation. Would they? Torres asked. Or would they finally have a chance to build something better? Even if your information is accurate, Councillor Morthak's tentacles writhed nervously. The servant species lack the technological capacity to threaten Council worlds. Their ships are primitive, their weapons crude. Sarah's smile widened. That's true, but there are 13 billion of them. And they all know where you live. The implications hung in the air like a death sentence. The Council had ruled through fear and superior technology, but they had never needed to defend against an entire galaxy simultaneously. Their military might was vast, but it was designed to crush individual rebellions, not face a universal uprising. You would plunge the galaxy into chaos. Ethmori's pheromones now carried undertones of desperation. Billions would die in the wars that follow. Billions have already died under your rule, Torres replied. At least this way, they die fighting for their freedom instead of in your harvesting chambers. Overlord Vexai leaned back on his throne, his four eyes narrowing as he studied the two humans. What you propose is impossible. The servant species cannot govern themselves. They lack the neural capacity for complex decision-making. We have bred it out of them. Actually, Sarah said, pulling up another set of holographic displays, that's not entirely accurate. Your breeding programs have been remarkably effective at creating docile populations, but they haven't eliminated the genetic potential for intelligence. It's simply been suppressed. We've developed techniques for reversing most of your modifications. Impossible, Vexai snarled. We tested them on the Colossi refugees who escaped your mining worlds. Within 6 months, their average intelligence scores had tripled. Within a year, they were designing their own starships. Sarah's voice carried a note of pride. It turns out that when you give sentient beings back their ability to think freely, they become remarkably resourceful. The chamber erupted again, this time with what could only be described as panic. Several council members were now communicating frantically through their various communication methods: telepathy, pheromone bursts, harmonic resonances. This is treason against the natural order. Councillor Zixara spoke for the first time, her voice a harmony of crystalline tones. The Council maintains stability through hierarchy. Without our guidance, these species would what? Sarah interrupted.
Build their own civilizations.
Make their own choices? Live their own lives without asking permission from self-appointed gods. They would make mistakes, Vexai said. Catastrophic errors that could destroy entire star systems. Yes, Torres agreed. They probably would. But they'd be their mistakes to make. And if they choose to destroy each other, then that's their choice too. But at least it would be a choice, instead of slow death in your prison. The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. This was the silence of beings who had ruled for so long they had forgotten what it felt like to face a threat they couldn't simply crush with overwhelming force. Finally, Overlord Vexai spoke. Your terms? Sarah straightened. Complete withdrawal from all occupied systems. Reparations paid to every species you've exploited. Full documentation of your technologies, including the methods for reversing your genetic modifications, and the establishment of a galactic tribunal to oversee the transition to representative government. Unacceptable. Then we have nothing more to discuss. Sarah turned toward the chamber's exit. Wait. The word came from Councillor Morthak, whose tentacles were now pale with fear. Perhaps accommodations could be made. A gradual transition. Certain concessions in exchange for limited autonomy. Sarah stopped walking but didn't turn around. Full independence or full broadcast. Those are your only choices. You cannot be serious. Vex High's voice carried notes of disbelief. You would risk the destruction of galactic civilization for an abstract principle? Now Sarah did turn around, and her expression was harder than steel. Overlord, my species has a saying, give me liberty or give me death. We mean it. Every single one of us. Even for your allies, your friends, among the servant species. They will suffer in the chaos that follows. They're already suffering, Torres said quietly. At least this way they'll have hope. The council members looked at each other through various forms of sensory communication. Finally, Vex Hay spoke again. We require time to consider your proposal. You have 12 hours, Sarah said. After that, the broadcast begins whether you agree or not. 12 hours to overturn 10,000 years of civilization. 12 hours to decide whether you want to be remembered as tyrants or as leaders who had the wisdom to step aside when their time was over. Sarah and Taurus walked toward the chamber exit, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. As they reached the doorway, Vexi High called out one final time. And if we refuse, if we choose to fight this broadcast, this revolution you're threatening to unleash, Sarah paused at the threshold. Then you'll discover why no species in galactic history has ever successfully conquered humanity. We don't just fight until we win, Overlord. We fight until our enemies remember why they were afraid of the dark. The two humans walked out of the chamber, leaving behind the most powerful beings in the galaxy to contemplate a choice they had never imagined they would have to make. In 12 hours, everything would change. The only question was whether the Council would choose to guide that change or be swept away by it. Behind them, the whispered conversations began immediately, urgent, desperate, and for the first time in millennia, uncertain. The guards of the galaxy had just learned they could bleed, and the universe would never be the same. The emergency session of the Cosmic Council had been in progress for 11 hours and 47 minutes when the first transmission began. High Admiral Kethvar materialized in the center of the chamber through quantum displacement, his usually perfect ceremonial armor scorched and damaged. The military leader of the Council's combined fleets had never appeared before the ruling body without formal preparation. But desperate times called for desperate measures. The humans were not bluffing, he announced without preamble. Every deep space monitoring station, every communication relay, every quantum beacon in the outer rim, they're all broadcasting simultaneously. Overlord Vex High's massive claws gouged furrows in the armrests of his bone throne. How is this possible? Our intelligence networks showed no sign of such extensive infrastructure. Because they built it inside our own. Kethvar replied grimly. 40 years ago, when we first made contact with their species, they volunteered to help upgrade our communication systems, said they wanted to facilitate better diplomatic relations. The implications hit the Council like a physical blow. Councillor Morthak's tentacles writhed in agitation. You're telling us that every time we've used our own networks, we've been feeding information directly to humanity? It's worse than that. Kethvar activated a holographic display that filled the chamber's center. The galaxy appeared in miniature. But instead of the familiar blue glow of Council communication networks, thousands of red points pulsed throughout every system. They didn't just tap our networks. They've been building their own alongside ours for 4 decades. Every maintenance drone, every repair ship, every routine upgrade, they were installing human technology. Councillor Zixara's crystalline form shimmered with harmonic frequencies that indicated severe distress. Show us the transmissions. The hologram shifted, displaying a simple human face. Neither Sarah nor Taurus, but a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, who spoke in the measured tones of a scholar. Citizens of the galaxy, the recorded message began. My name is Dr. Babb, Elizabeth Reeves, and I'm speaking to you from Earth. What I'm about to tell you may be difficult to accept, but every word has been verified through 40 years of careful investigation. The transmission cut to documentary footage, Council ships arriving at peaceful worlds, the systematic processing of populations, the cold efficiency of the harvesting operations. But this wasn't the sanitized version that appeared in Council archives. This was unedited, unflinching, and utterly damning. Turn it off, Vexai snarled. I can't, Kethvar replied. The broadcast is hard-coded into every system. Attempting to shut down the networks would disable our entire communication grid. Quote, on the display, Dr. Reeves continued her narration as the images shifted to show the breeding programs, the neural modifications, the careful cultivation of slave populations. But what made it truly devastating wasn't just the revelation of the Council's crimes, it was the meticulous documentation of how those crimes could be undone. The genetic modifications performed on your species are not permanent, Dr. Weechie, Reeves explained as detailed medical schematics appeared on screen. We have developed techniques for reversing nearly all of the Council's biological control methods. The neural inhibitors can be safely removed. The breeding restrictions can be overcome. Your people can be whole again. Councillor Ethmore's pheromone output had shifted to pure panic. They're giving them the tools to free themselves. This isn't just revelation, it's revolution. The transmission showed before and after images of Kalosi refugees, their eyes bright with recovered intelligence. It displayed Vraxian children whose neural inhibitors had been removed, solving complex mathematical problems that should have been impossible for their supposedly limited minds. Most damaging of all, it showed representatives from dozens of species working together in what was clearly a human facility, planning and preparing for this very moment.
We know this information will be shocking, Dr.
Reeves continued. We know it will be painful to learn how your people have suffered, but we also know that you have the strength to build something better. You have allies throughout the galaxy who stand ready to help. And you have something your oppressors have never understood: the unbreakable power of free will. The transmission paused, and Dr. Reeves looked directly at the camera with an expression of infinite compassion. To the members of the Council who may be monitoring this broadcast, it's not too late. You can choose to be part of the solution. You can choose to help heal the damage you've caused, but you cannot choose to maintain the status quo. That decision was taken away from you the moment you chose to harvest innocent people like crops. High Admiral Cathvar gestured to another display showing incoming reports from across the galaxy. It's working. We're receiving confirmation of uprisings on 17% of controlled worlds. The numbers are climbing every hour. Deploy the suppression fleets Vex High commanded. To where? Cathvar's voice carried a note of desperate frustration. It's happening everywhere simultaneously. We have approximately 300 suppression vessels. There are over 4,000 worlds in active rebellion, and the number is increasing exponentially. Councillor Morthak's tentacles had gone completely pale. What about the neural controls? The inhibitors should prevent organized resistance. The humans provided detailed instructions for removing them safely. Populations are following the medical procedures in the broadcast and regaining full cognitive function within hours. Cathvar paused, consulting another readout. It appears they've been testing these procedures for decades on refugee populations. The chamber filled with the sounds of panic harmonic wails from the crystalline members, pheromone bursts of fear from the chemical communicators, and the grinding of teeth and claws from the more physically expressive species. There's more, Cathvar continued grimly. The human transmission isn't just aimed at our servant populations. They're broadcasting technical specifications for faster-than-light communication to every species in the galaxy. Within days, every world will be able to communicate directly with every other world without using our networks.
Impossible, Zixara's harmonic voice cracked.
Such technology requires decades of development and massive industrial infrastructure. Unless you've been building that infrastructure in secret for 40 years while pretending to negotiate peaceful cooperation, Cathvar replied. The humans have been playing a game we didn't even know existed. A new voice cut through the Council's panic, calm, measured, and transmitted through the chamber's own communication systems. Ambassador Sarah Chen appeared as a hologram in the center of the chamber, but this wasn't a recorded message. Her eyes moved to focus on each council member in turn. Good morning, overlords. I see you've been watching our broadcast. How are you accessing our private chambers? Vekshay roared. The same way we've been accessing everything else for 40 years, Sarah replied, pleasantly. You invited us in, remember? Diplomatic cooperation. Cultural exchange, mutual understanding. Her smile was sharp as a blade. We understood you perfectly. What do you want? The question came from Councillor Morthak, whose tentacles were now trembling visibly. I want to give you one more chance to make the right choice, Sarah said. In 6 hours, the second phase of our broadcast begins. That's when we start transmitting the technical specifications for manufacturing weapons capable of penetrating Council shielding. The silence that followed was so complete that the ambient hum of the chamber's life support systems sounded like a roaring wind. You wouldn't. Ethmore's pheromones carried notes of disbelief. The chaos would be uncontrollable.
The chaos already is uncontrollable. Sarah replied.
The question is whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem. We can end this transition period with a negotiated peace and a stable galactic government, or we can let it burn and rebuild from the ashes. Either way, your rule is over. Even if we agreed to your terms, Vexhai said slowly, the transition you're describing would take decades, centuries. How do you propose to maintain order during such a period? The same way your species maintained order before the Council conquered them, Sarah replied. Through cooperation, negotiation, and mutual respect. It's not a perfect system, but it's better than slavery. High Admiral Kethvar stepped forward. Our fleet still control the major hyperspace routes. We could cut off communication between systems, isolate the rebellions. You could try, Sarah acknowledged, but you'd only be delaying the inevitable while ensuring it happens in the most violent way possible. Every hour you resist, more of your former subjects are learning to build weapons. Every day you fight, more species are forming alliances against you. Right now, you're facing rebellions. Continue this course, and you'll be facing a galactic war of extermination. The truth of her words was evident in the reports still flowing into Kethvar's displays. What had started as scattered uprisings were rapidly organizing into coordinated resistance movements. Freed populations weren't just celebrating their liberation, they were sharing information, coordinating strategies, and pooling resources with terrifying efficiency. Besides, Sarah continued conversationally, attacking civilian populations to maintain your rule would just prove everything we've said about you. Right now, some species are still hoping for peaceful resolution. Start massacring innocents and you'll turn even your remaining allies against you. Councillor Zixara's crystalline form pulsed with shifting colors. What guarantees do we have? If we surrender our power, what prevents these rebellious populations from seeking revenge? The same thing that prevented us from seeking revenge when we had the chance, Sarah replied. The knowledge that building something better is more important than punishing those who built something worse. Her expression softened slightly. Look, I won't lie to you. Some of your former subjects are going to want justice for what was done to them. But justice doesn't have to mean extermination. It can mean truth, reparations, and the promise that such things will never happen again. And if we refuse?
Then in 6 hours, we start broadcasting weapon specifications.
In 12 hours, we release the locations and defensive capabilities of every Council facility. In 18 hours, we provide detailed tactical analyses of how to most effectively target your command structures. Sarah's voice never lost its conversational tone, making the threats all the more chilling. After that, we start getting creative. The implications hung in the chamber like a death sentence. The Council had ruled through superior technology and strategic information advantages. The humans were systematically destroying both. This is madness, Morthak whispered, his tentacles barely moving. You're talking about the end of civilization. No, Sarah corrected gently. We're talking about the end of your civilization, the beginning of everyone else's. A soft chime filled the chamber, the sound that indicated an incoming priority transmission. Kethvar activated the communication array, and suddenly the chamber was filled with voices from across the galaxy. Council, Command, this is Fleet Admiral Nextoth commanding the Outer Rim Suppression Force. We are requesting immediate reinforcement. The Colossi mining worlds have somehow acquired military-grade shielding technology. Our weapons are having no effect, and they're fielding vessels that match our cruisers in firepower. Central Command, this is the VRAC system garrison. The entire population has somehow overcome their neural inhibitors simultaneously. They've seized control of the orbital defense platforms and are demanding our immediate withdrawal. Emergency transmission from the Zephyrian Manufacturing Collective. Our entire workforce has gone into revolt. They've disabled the productivity enhancers and are dismantling the control systems. Please advise on suppression protocols. The reports continued, each one describing the same impossible situation. Populations that should have been incapable of organized resistance, suddenly displaying technology and coordination that rivaled the Council's own forces.
How?
Vexhai's voice was barely above a whisper.
40 years of preparation,
Sarah replied.
We didn't just study your control methods. We studied your victims. We learned what they had been before you broke them. We helped them remember who they really were. She paused, looking at each council member in turn. Did you really think species advanced enough to build interstellar civilizations would stay broken forever once they learned how to heal? The reports from Kethvar's displays were painting a clear picture. The rebellion wasn't chaotic or disorganized. It was following a carefully planned sequence that maximized effectiveness while minimizing casualties. Key infrastructure was being captured intact. Council personnel were being offered terms for surrender rather than being killed outright. Most telling of all, the various species were coordinating their efforts across multiple star systems with precision that suggested long-term planning and preparation. You've been working with them, Ethmori realized, her pheromones shifting to a complex mixture of fear and grudging respect. All this time, you weren't just studying the Council. You were organizing the resistance. We prefer to think of it as diplomatic outreach, Sarah said with a slight smile. Amazing how much easier it is to make friends when you're offering freedom instead of chains. Another chime sounded, and this time the voice that filled the chamber was one the Council recognized, Ambassador Veltar of the Hegemony Systems, one of their most reliable client states. Council Command, this is Ambassador Veltar. After reviewing the human broadcast and consulting with our population, the Hegemony Systems are formally withdrawing from the Council Alliance. We will be joining the Coalition for Galactic Liberation within the next standard cycle. We recommend you seriously consider the humans' peace terms before this situation escalates further. The message cut off, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. The Hegemony had been Council allies for over 3,000 years. If they were defecting, it meant the rebellion had reached even the privileged client species. How many others? Vexay asked quietly. Kefar consulted his displays with the expression of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. 17 client states have declared independence in the last 6 hours. Another 43 are demanding immediate cessation of tribute payments and withdrawal of council oversight personnel. They can't all have been compromised by human agents, Zexkera protested. They didn't need to be, Sarah replied. They just needed to see that resistance was possible. That's the thing about tyranny. It only works as long as people believe it's inevitable. The moment they see an alternative, everything changes. The chamber fell quiet except for the continuing stream of reports from across the galaxy. Each update painted the same picture, a carefully orchestrated revolution unfolding with mechanical precision across thousands of worlds simultaneously. Finally, Councillor Morthax spoke, his voice barely audible. What exactly are you proposing as terms for this transition? Sarah's expression became businesslike. Complete withdrawal of Council forces from all occupied systems within 1 standard year. Full reparations to be negotiated with each affected species. Establishment of a Galactic Tribunal to oversee the transition to representative government. And most importantly, full cooperation in healing the damage you've caused. Medical treatment for modified populations, technological assistance for rebuilding efforts, and whatever else is needed to undo 10,000 years of systematic oppression. And our people? Vexhai asked. What happens to Council species during this transition? They get the same thing everyone else gets, Sarah replied. Freedom to choose their own path. If Council worlds want to remain allied with each other, that's their choice. If they want to join the broader galactic community, that's also their choice. The only thing that ends is the right to choose for other people. The admission hung in the air like a revelation. After millennia of viewing other species as resources to be managed, the concept of genuine choice for all was so alien that several council members seemed unable to process it. 5 hours, Sarah said quietly. That's how long you have before the weapons specifications begin broadcasting. I hope you'll make the right choice. Her hologram flickered and vanished, leaving the 13 most powerful beings in the galaxy alone, with a decision that would reshape the universe. Outside the chamber, the revolution continued its inexorable spread, powered by something the Council had never understood and could never control, the simple, irrepressible desire of sentient beings to be free. The Council's debate had raged for 4 hours and 37 minutes when the first distress beacon reached them from the core worlds. Pi Admiral Kethvar's face had aged a decade in the span of a single day. His usually immaculate uniform was wrinkled, his typically perfect posture sagged with exhaustion, and his eyes held the hollow look of a military commander watching his entire civilization crumble in real time. It's not just the outer systems anymore, he announced to the assembled council members. The rebellion has reached Nexus Prime. A collective sound escaped the chamber. Part gasp, part wail, part growl of rage. Nexus Prime wasn't just another council world, it was the administrative heart of their empire, home to the vast bureaucratic machinery that managed the affairs of 13 billion subjects. More importantly, it was supposed to be impossible to reach without using council-controlled hyperspace routes. How? The question came from Overlord Vexhai, whose massive form had been slumped on his throne for the past hour in what appeared to be a state of shock. The humans provided them with independent, faster-than-light technology. Kethvar replied, his voice hollow. Not just communication arrays, actual transportation systems. Species that haven't had interstellar capability for millennia are suddenly fielding fleets that can appear anywhere in the galaxy without warning. Councillor Morthak's tentacles writhed in agitation. That's impossible. Such technology requires massive industrial infrastructure, rare materials, construction facilities, which they've been building in secret for decades. Kethvar interrupted. Every mining operation the humans established, every research station they requested permission to build, every cultural exchange facility they set up, they were all covers for manufacturing and distribution centers. The holographic displays around the chamber painted a picture of systematic deception on an almost incomprehensible scale. What the Council had interpreted as humanity's desperate attempt to find a place in galactic civilization had actually been the most elaborate intelligence and sabotage operation in recorded history. "Show me Nexus Prime," Vex High commanded. The display shifted to show the massive orbital stations surrounding the Council's administrative capital. But instead of the usual orderly traffic patterns of bureaucratic vessels and supply convoys, the space around Nexus Prime swarmed with ships of a dozen different designs, converted mining vessels, retrofitted passenger transports, and sleek new warships that bore no resemblance to any known Council technology. "The Colossi Mining Guild delivered the ultimatum personally," Kethvar continued. "They've blockaded the entire system and are demanding the immediate release of all administrative prisoners, the opening of the historical archives, and the evacuation of Council personnel within 48 hours. The Colossi were broken down to subsistence-level intelligence."
Councillor Zixara's harmonic voice cracked with disbelief.
"They couldn't organize a supply convoy, much less a military blockade. That was before the humans taught them how to reverse your modifications." A new voice interrupted. "The Chamber's communication systems activated without authorization, displaying the image of a being that most Council members recognized, but few had ever seen speak with such clarity and intelligence. Foreman Kellis had been the designated spokesperson for the Colossi Mining Guild for over 2 centuries. In all that time, his communications had been limited to simple requests for resources, basic status reports, and the occasional plea for medical supplies for his people. The being on the display now bore the same physical characteristics, but his eyes blazed with an intelligence that had been systematically suppressed for 3,000 years. "Council members," Kellis said, his voice carrying none of the subservient tones that had marked his previous communications. "My people have asked me to deliver a message. This communication is unauthorized," Vexai snarled. "Terminate the connection immediately." "I'm afraid that's no longer possible," Kellas replied calmly. "Your communication networks are now under joint administration by the Coalition for Galactic Liberation. We will, however, keep this brief." The implications hit the Council like a physical blow. Their most secure communication systems had been compromised so thoroughly that former slaves were now using them to deliver ultimatums to their former masters. "The Colossi people wish you to know that we remember," Kellis continued. "We remember what we were before you reduced us to mining drones. We remember our poets, our philosophers, our artists. We remember the children you took for your experiments and the families you separated for your breeding programs." His voice remained steady, but his eyes burned with centuries of accumulated rage. "And now, thanks to our human allies, we remember how to fight." "You have no idea what you're doing," Mortak's tentacles flailed desperately. "Without Council coordination, the galaxy will tear itself apart. Species will war with each other over resources, territory, ideology." "Will they?" Kellis interrupted. "Or will they finally have a chance to resolve their differences through negotiation instead of having solutions imposed by distant tyrants?"
He paused, consulting something off-screen. "I'm receiving reports from our allies throughout the galaxy."
"Do you know what they're doing with their newfound freedom?" The display split to show feeds from dozens of worlds. But instead of the chaos and violence the Council had predicted, the images showed something entirely different. Former enemies were meeting in hastily constructed conference centers. Mixed species work crews were dismantling control infrastructure while carefully preserving essential services. Emergency aid was flowing between worlds that had been prevented from communicating for centuries. "They're talking to each other," Kellis said simply. "After millennia of being forbidden from direct communication, they're finally able to discover what they have in common instead of being told what divides them."
This cooperation won't last. Ethmori's pheromones carried desperate conviction.
"Scarcity will breed conflict. Different species have incompatible needs, incompatible worldviews. Incompatible according to whom? The question came from another unauthorized transmission, this one showing a being that no council member had seen for over 5,000 years. The Vraxian on the screen was clearly elderly, but her eyes held depths of wisdom and intelligence that should have been impossible, given her species' imposed limitations. Elder Vraxiana, Vexai whispered, and for the first time, his voice carried notes of something that might have been fear. Hello, Vexai, the ancient Vraxian replied, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from ages of experience. It's been a long time since anyone called me by my true name. Your people have been calling me Primary Unit 47. Alpha, for quite some time now. The revelation hit the chamber like a meteor impact. Elder Vraxiana had been the leader of the Vraxian Confederacy when the Council first arrived in their space. She was supposed to have died in the initial conquest, over 5 millennia ago. You're supposed to be dead, Zixara's harmonic voice was barely audible. I was supposed to be broken, Vraxiana corrected. But breaking someone and killing them are different things. You simply reduced me to a state where I couldn't access the knowledge and experience that made me dangerous to your rule. Her smile was sharp as starlight. The humans taught us how to recover what we had lost. All of it. The implications cascaded through the chamber like dominoes falling. If the Council's most ancient and experienced enemies were still alive, if they retained their knowledge and capabilities despite millennia of suppression, then the rebellion wasn't just an uprising of the oppressed, it was the return of entire civilizations that had been thought extinct. How many others? Mortak asked, his voice barely above a whisper. All of us, Vraxiana replied simply. Every leader you thought you had killed, every scientist you believed you had broken, every general you assumed you had pacified. We've all been here, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was stolen from us. The display shifted again, showing dozens of faces from across the galaxy, beings whose species the Council had conquered, whose civilizations had been dismantled, whose very identities had been erased from official records. But they were all very much alive, and they were all looking at the Council with expressions of calm, implacable determination. The human broadcast didn't just tell our people the truth about what was done to them, Elder Vraxiana continued. It gave them the tools to remember who they used to be. And now we're all working together to ensure that our children can become who they were meant to be. High Admiral Kethvar stepped forward, his military bearing finally reasserting itself despite the chaos. Even with recovered leadership and human technology, you lack the industrial capacity to sustain a galactic war. Your populations have been reduced, your infrastructure dismantled. Have they? The voice was new, but the face was unmistakably human. Dr. Alina Rodriguez materialized in the chamber's center, her image crackling slightly with the strain of long-distance quantum transmission. Hello, Council members. I'm sorry we haven't been formally introduced. I'm the Director of Human Colonial Development. The title was innocuous enough, but something in the woman's manner suggested it represented far more than simple bureaucratic oversight. For the past 40 years, while you've been convinced that humanity was struggling to establish a few small colonies in the outer systems, we've actually been engaged in the largest infrastructure development project in galactic history. Dr. Rodriguez continued. Every failed human settlement, every abandoned research station, every evacuated colony world, they were all covers for something much more ambitious. The display around the chamber transformed, showing star charts that bore no resemblance to official Council records. Where the Council's maps showed empty space or minor human outposts, the new charts revealed a vast network of industrial complexes, shipyards, and population centers. We call it the Liberation Network, Dr. Tripol, Rodriguez explained. Fully automated manufacturing facilities capable of producing everything from basic medical supplies to military-grade starships, self-sufficient agricultural systems that can support billions of people, education centers where refugees from Council oppression can recover their full potential. She paused, her expression becoming almost apologetic. We've been building it inside the dark matter structures that your senses can't detect. Turns out your people never figured out how to work with exotic matter. The silence that followed was the sound of an empire realizing it had been outmaneuvered so completely that resistance was not just futile, but absurd. How many people? Vexhai's voice was hollow. Currently, about 12 billion humans, plus representatives from every species you've ever oppressed. Tomorrow? Probably 15 billion, as more populations complete their rehabilitation programs. Doctor, Rodriguez consulted a datapad that materialized in her hands. We estimate that within 6 months we'll have enough industrial capacity to support the needs of every being in the galaxy who wants to join us. And those who don't? The question came from Councillor Zixara, whose crystalline form had shifted to deep blue frequencies indicating profound resignation. Will be left alone to live their lives as they choose, Dr. Rodriguez replied. That's the whole point. Freedom means the freedom to make your own decisions, even if others disagree with them. Including the freedom to remain loyal to the Council? If that's what someone genuinely chooses, without coercion or manipulation, then yes. We're not trying to build another empire. We're trying to build a system where empires are unnecessary. The chamber fell quiet as the Council members absorbed this information. Everything they had believed about the strategic situation had been systematically false. Everything they had assumed about human capabilities had been deliberately understated. Everything they had counted on to maintain their rule had been compromised from the beginning. There's something else you need to know, Dr. Karras, Rodriguez continued, her tone becoming more serious. The weapon specifications that Ambassador Chen mentioned? We're not going to broadcast them. A faint spark of hope flickered in Vex High's eyes. You're reconsidering? We're making them unnecessary, Dr. Rodriguez corrected. In approximately 30 minutes, Liberation fleets will begin arriving at every Council military installation in the galaxy. Not to attack them, but to offer their personnel a choice. Join the new galactic community as equals, or return to their home worlds with full honors and pensions. The holographic displays around the chamber lit up with proximity alerts as thousands of ships dropped out of hyperspace near Council facilities across the galaxy. But these weren't the crude conversion jobs and improvised vessels that had characterized the early rebellion. These were sleek advanced warships that incorporated the best features of every major galactic civilization, improved with technologies that the Council had never seen before. Your people are soldiers, not criminals. Dr. Rodriguez continued. Most of them were just following orders in a system they inherited rather than created. We're hoping they'll choose to be part of building something better, but we won't force them. And if they refuse, then they go home to their families and live peaceful lives. We've already established pension funds for all Council military personnel and their dependents. No one needs to keep fighting just to survive. The offers of mercy were somehow more devastating than any threat could have been. The Council had ruled through fear, and their enemies were responding with forgiveness. It was a level of moral authority that no amount of military might could challenge. Why? The question came from Morthak, whose tentacles had stopped their agitated writhing and now hung limp with exhaustion. Why show mercy to those who showed none to you? Because, Doctor, Rodriguez replied gently, building a civilization based on revenge just creates the conditions for the next cycle of oppression. We want to build something that will last, something that will be worth passing on to our children. She paused, looking directly at each Council member in turn. It's not too late for you to be part of that. We could use your experience, your knowledge, your perspectives, just not your authority over others. And if we refuse? Vexhay asked. Then you'll be free to return to your home worlds and live whatever lives you choose. But your rule ends today, one way or another. The only question is whether it ends with reconciliation or with irrelevance. The transmission began to fade as Dr. Rodriguez prepared to disconnect. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. After that, we begin the formal transition with or without your cooperation. The chamber plunged into darkness as the unauthorized transmissions ended, leaving the 13 members of the Cosmic Council alone with a decision that would determine not just their own fates, but the future of galactic civilization itself. Outside, the universe was already moving forward without them, and for the first time in 10,000 years, it was moving toward hope instead of fear. Dawn came to the council chambers not with the rising of any sun, but with the soft chime of an incoming priority transmission. For the first time in over 6,000 years, the sound was not answered immediately. The 13 beings who had once commanded the fate of every living soul in the galaxy sat in contemplative silence, each wrestling with a decision that would define the remainder of their existence. High Admiral Cathvar had remained at his post throughout the night, monitoring communications from across the galaxy. His face bore the weathered expression of a career soldier who had watched his entire worldview collapse in the span of 24 hours. The transition is proceeding ahead of schedule. He reported to the silent council members. 93% of our military installations have accepted the Liberation Fleet's terms. Personnel are being transferred to transport vessels for repatriation to their home worlds or to staging areas for those who wish to join the coalition. Overlord Vexhay shifted slightly on his ancient throne, the first movement he had made in hours. And our forces that refused the terms are being left alone, Kefar replied. and his voice carried a note of something that might have been surprise. The coalition fleets have simply withdrawn from those systems and established monitoring stations at a respectful distance. They're waiting. Waiting for what? For our people to change their minds, I assume. There's been no attempt at coercion, no ultimatums, no blockades. They're just there. Available if anyone decides they want to join the transition after all. The gesture was so alien to the Council's understanding of conflict that several members struggled to process it. In their experience, military advantage was always pressed until the enemy was completely crushed. The concept of patient non-violent persuasion was beyond their comprehension. Councillor Mortak's tentacles stirred for the first time since the previous evening. What about the servant populations? Are they demanding retribution? Kethvar consulted his displays, scrolling through reports from across the galaxy. That's perhaps the most surprising development of all. The liberated populations are focusing almost entirely on rebuilding and recovery. There have been some trials, the war criminals, the administrators who implemented the most brutal policies, but even those are being conducted according to legal frameworks that emphasize justice over revenge. He paused, highlighting a specific report. The Kelasi have established truth and reconciliation committees on every world they've liberated. They're documenting the full scope of what was done to them, but they're also identifying council personnel who showed mercy, who tried to minimize suffering, who helped where they could within the constraints of the system.
And what happens to those people? They're being offered positions of responsibility in the new governments.
The Kelosi Council of Elders? Yes, they've reconstituted their original leadership structure. Issued a statement yesterday.
It said, "Those who showed kindness in dark times have earned the right to help build the light." The words hung in the chamber like a judgment that none of them felt they deserved. For millennia, the council had ruled through the principle that strength was the only virtue that mattered. The idea that their former subjects were judging them by standards of mercy and compassion was profoundly unsettling. Councillor Ethmori released a complex pattern of pheromones that translated roughly to philosophical confusion. How do they maintain order without fear? Without hierarchy enforced through power? They seem to be managing through consensus and cooperation. Kethvar replied. It's remarkably effective, actually. Resource allocation decisions that would have taken our bureaucracy months to process are being handled by interspecies committees in a matter of hours. And the solutions they're developing are more equitable and sustainable than anything our systems ever produced.
That's impossible. Secura's crystalline form pulsed with skeptical frequencies.
Different species have fundamentally incompatible needs. The mathematical optimization required to balance their requirements apparently becomes much simpler when the species in question are allowed to communicate directly with each other. Kethvar interrupted. Without our translation filters and administrative oversight, they're discovering that most of their incompatible needs were actually artificial conflicts created by our resource allocation policies. The implications were staggering. The Council had justified much of their authoritarian control by claiming that only centralized management could prevent interspecies conflict. If that premise was false, then the foundation of their entire system was built on a lie. The priority communication chime sounded again, more insistent this time. Vexhai gestured weakly for Kethvar to accept the transmission. Ambassador Sarah Chen materialized in the center of the chamber, but she looked different from her previous appearances. Gone was the formal diplomatic attire, replaced by practical work clothes that bore the insignia of the Coalition for Galactic Liberation. Her expression was tired but determined, like someone who had been working tirelessly to coordinate a massive undertaking. "Good morning, Council members," she said, her voice carrying none of the confrontational edge from their previous encounters. "I hope you've had time to consider your options." "We have," Vexay replied, his massive form slumping further into his throne. "But we find ourselves uncertain about the alternatives you presented. What concerns you?" The question was asked with such genuine interest that several council members were taken aback. They had expected demands, ultimatums, perhaps gloating over their defeat. Instead, the human ambassador seemed genuinely interested in understanding their perspective. "You offer us positions in this new galactic community," Councillor Morthak said slowly. "But how can we trust that this offer is genuine? We have been your enemies for decades. Our species has committed atrocities against yours and countless others. Why would you want our participation?" Sarah's expression softened. "Because you have knowledge and experience that could benefit everyone. You've managed galactic-scale logistics, coordinated the needs of thousands of different species, maintained stability across impossible distances. Those are valuable skills, even if they were applied in service of an unjust system. But more than that, she continued, your people. You have families, hopes, fears, dreams that go beyond your roles in the council. You've spent so long being defined by your positions of power that you've forgotten who you are underneath all of that authority. Ethmarie's pheromones shifted to patterns indicating deep confusion. But if we are no longer rulers, what are we? Whatever you choose to be, Sarah replied simply. Scientists, teachers, artists, engineers, philosophers. Whatever interests you, whatever brings you joy, whatever allows you to contribute to something larger than yourself. And if we choose to remain together? To maintain our relationships and partnerships, then you're welcome to do that. The coalition isn't about breaking up existing relationships. It's about making sure those relationships are based on choice rather than coercion. Zixara's crystalline form shifted to frequencies that indicated cautious hope. What about our people? The populations of the Council homeworlds? They have known no other system for millennia. They'll have time to adapt, Sarah assured her. The transition isn't happening overnight. We're establishing support systems, education programs, economic assistance, whatever people need to find their place in the new order. Some council worlds have already voted to join the coalition as full members. Others are choosing to remain independent but participate in cooperative programs. A few are taking time to decide what they want their future to look like. And that's acceptable? This, diversity of choices, it's the entire point, Sarah said with a slight smile. Unity doesn't require uniformity. We can work together toward common goals while still maintaining our individual identities and preferences. High Admiral Kethvar stepped forward. What about our military personnel, the soldiers who served the Council faithfully? What happens to them in this new order? Many of them are already finding new roles, Sarah replied. Peacekeeping forces, disaster response teams, exploration and survey missions. There's plenty of work for people with military training that doesn't involve oppressing anyone. And for those who want to pursue entirely different careers, we have retraining programs. She paused, consulting a datapad that appeared in her hand. Admiral Nextoth. You remember him, your Outer Rim Suppression Commander? He's currently leading a relief effort on Kellis Prime, helping to restore the mining world's ecosystems. Turns out, he has a background in environmental engineering that he never had a chance to use during his military service. The revelation that their former enemies were finding constructive roles for Council personnel was perhaps more shocking than any threat could have been. It suggested a level of strategic thinking and moral sophistication that challenged everything the Council thought they knew about the nature of governance. There's something else you should know, Sarah continued, her expression becoming more serious. We've been analyzing the Council archives that we gained access to during the network infiltration. We found records going back to the very beginning of your empire. A collective tension filled the chamber. The deepest Council archives contained information that even most Council members had never seen. The true history of how their rule had begun and evolved over 10 millennia. We know about the original threat, Sarah said quietly. The extinct civilization that nearly destroyed the galaxy 12,000 years ago, the chaos that followed their collapse. The desperate alliance of surviving species that came together to prevent another catastrophe of that scale. The silence that followed was profound. The founding crisis of the Council was perhaps the most closely guarded secret in galactic history. We know that the Council's authoritarian structure wasn't created out of malice, Sarah continued. It was created out of fear. Fear that without absolute unity, without perfect order, the galaxy would tear itself apart again. Vexay's voice was barely audible. Then you understand why we could not allow chaos to return. I understand why you believed you couldn't allow it, Sarah corrected gently. But that fear has blinded you to other possibilities. You became so focused on preventing the last catastrophe that you created the conditions for a different kind of disaster, she gestured, and holographic displays filled the chamber. Not military reports or strategic analyses, but something far more powerful. They showed children playing in mixed species groups, former enemies working together on construction projects, artists from different worlds creating collaborative masterpieces. This is what happens when people are free to choose cooperation instead of having it imposed on them, Sarah explained. It's messier than your perfect order, and yes, there are conflicts and disagreements, but it's also more creative, more resilient, and more genuinely stable than any system based on fear. And if we're wrong, Mortak asked, if this experiment in freedom leads to the same kind of catastrophe that destroyed the ancients, then we'll face it together, as equals, making decisions based on the best information available, rather than the fears of the past. Sarah's voice carried absolute conviction. But I don't think we'll face that catastrophe, because we're not the same species that the ancients were. We've learned from their mistakes, and we've learned from yours. The chamber fell quiet as the council members contemplated this perspective. For 10,000 years they had justified their actions by pointing to an ancient catastrophe that had nearly ended all life in the galaxy. The possibility that their cure had become worse than the disease was almost too enormous to comprehend. What would you need from us? Vex High finally asked. If we were to participate in this transition? Your knowledge, your experience, and your commitment to making it work, Sarah replied. We don't need you to abandon your identities or pretend that the past didn't happen. We need you to help us build something better. And if we prove unworthy of that trust, then you'll face the consequences of your actions, just like anyone else. But you'll face them in a system designed around justice and rehabilitation, rather than punishment and revenge. Councillor Zixara pulsed with patterns indicating careful consideration. This transition you're describing, how long do you estimate it will take? Generations, Sarah admitted. Real change doesn't happen overnight, but we've already started and the momentum is building. Every day, more species are choosing cooperation over competition, dialogue over domination. And our role in this process? Whatever you choose it to be. Advisors, teachers, participants, observers, it's up to you. The only thing that's not available anymore is the role of supreme rulers making decisions for everyone else. The finality of that statement settled over the chamber like a shroud. The age of the council's absolute authority was ending, whether they participated in its replacement or not. We need time to discuss this among ourselves, Vex Hay said finally. Of course, Sarah nodded, but not too much time. The galaxy is moving forward with or without you, and the longer you wait, the harder it will be to find meaningful roles in what comes next. Her image began to fade as the transmission ended. For what it's worth, she said as her hologram flickered, I hope you choose to be part of the solution. The universe is big enough for all of us if we're willing to share it. The chamber fell into darkness once again, leaving the council alone with the most important decision they had ever faced. Outside, the liberation of the galaxy continued, powered by the simple recognition that freedom was not something to be granted by benevolent rulers, but something that belonged inherently to every sentient being. The question now was whether the council would choose to be remembered as the tyrants who finally fell, or as the leaders who had the wisdom to step aside when their time was over. In the silence of the chamber, 13 ancient beings contemplated the difference between power and authority, between ruling and serving, between fear and hope. Their choice would echo through eternity. 6 months after the last transmission from the Cosmic Council's chambers, the galaxy looked nothing like it had for 10,000 years. The massive orbital station that had once housed the Council's seat of power now served as the headquarters for the Galactic Coordination Assembly, a name that had been chosen specifically for its lack of imperial grandeur. Where ornate thrones had once dominated the central chamber, simple seats were arranged in concentric circles that allowed representatives from every member species to see and hear each other as equals. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the central podium, no longer representing humanity alone, but serving as the elected coordinator for the day's session. Around her, beings from across the galaxy engaged in heated but respectful debate about resource allocation for the reconstruction of the former mining worlds. The Colossi delegation has raised valid concerns about the timeline, Sarah was saying, her voice carrying easily through the chamber's advanced acoustics. But we also need to consider the Vraxian proposal for parallel development tracks that could accelerate the restoration process. At one of the delegation tables, a figure that few beings in the galaxy would have recognized was taking careful notes. The being wore simple robes and bore the identifying badge of an advisor to the Colossi delegation. But anyone who had known the Cosmic Council would have recognized the distinctive reptilian features of former Overlord Vex High. He had chosen the name Vex when he requested asylum with the liberated Colossi people. The High suffix had been a title of dominance in his original culture, something he had voluntarily abandoned along with his throne and his absolute authority. Now he served as a consultant on large-scale logistics, helping the species his people had oppressed for millennia to rebuild their shattered worlds. It had not been an easy transition. The first few months had been marked by suspicion, anger, and demands for justice from populations who had suffered under his rule. But Vex had surprised everyone, most of all himself, by accepting responsibility for his actions without excuse or justification. He had testified before Truth and Reconciliation committees, provided crucial information about council administrative systems, and worked tirelessly to help undo the damage his empire had caused. More importantly, he had done it all without expecting forgiveness or redemption. He had simply done the work because it needed to be done. Advisor Vex, Sarah called from the podium. You have experience with the industrial coordination requirements for this kind of project. What's your assessment of the resource allocation proposals? The former overlord stood slowly, conscious of the way conversations quieted when he spoke. Even after months of productive cooperation, his presence still carried the weight of history. Coordinator Chen, the Colossi proposal is sound but conservative, he said, his voice carrying none of the imperious tones that had once commanded fear across the galaxy. However, the Vraxian parallel development approach could reduce the overall timeline by approximately 30% if we implement shared infrastructure protocols. He paused, consulting the datapad that had become a constant companion. I would recommend a hybrid approach that incorporates the Colossi environmental safeguards with the Vraxian efficiency improvements. Based on similar projects during the Council era, this should optimize both speed and sustainability. Any concerns from the delegation leaders? Sarah asked. Elder Vrexiana, now serving as the elected representative of the Vraxian Confederation, stood to respond. The ancient leader had become something of a symbol for the transformation sweeping the galaxy, a being who had survived the worst of the Council's oppression and chosen forgiveness over revenge. The Vraxian delegation appreciates Advisor Vax's expertise, she said, her voice carrying the authority of ages. We have no objections to the hybrid approach, provided that environmental impact assessments are conducted by joint species committees rather than single species oversight. The exchange was remarkable, not just for its civility, but for what it represented. A former tyrant and one of his most prominent victims were now working together as colleagues, their shared expertise more important than their painful history. From another section of the chamber, Foreman Kellis, now President Kellis of the Colossi Mining Guild Cooperative, nodded his approval. The Colossi delegation concurs. Advisor Vex's historical knowledge of our world's industrial capacity has been invaluable in our reconstruction efforts. The formal courtesy was genuine but carried undertones of complexity that only those who had lived through the transition could fully understand. Kellis and his people had not forgotten what had been done to them, but they had chosen to focus on building a better future rather than relitigating the past. As the debate continued, Sarah found herself reflecting on how dramatically her own role had evolved. She was no longer a desperate diplomat trying to save her species from extinction, but a coordinator helping to manage the most complex political transformation in galactic history. The skills were similar: negotiation, compromise, finding common ground between different perspectives, but the stakes were entirely different. The communication panel at her podium chimed softly, indicating an incoming priority message. Sarah glanced at the display and smiled slightly before activating the transmission. We're receiving a report from the Deep Space Exploration Initiative, she announced to the assembly. Captain Torres has news from the Outer Galaxy Survey mission. Admiral Marcus Torres, now Captain Torres of the exploration vessel New Horizons, appeared as a hologram above the central podium. The former military commander had found new purpose in leading mixed-species crews on missions to explore the uncharted regions beyond the galaxy's rim. Greetings, Assembly, Torres said, his weathered face showing signs of excitement that the old admiral would never have displayed. We've made contact with what appears to be a surviving outpost of the ancient civilization. The chamber fell silent. The ancients, the species whose catastrophic civil war had nearly destroyed all life in the galaxy 12,000 years ago, were supposedly extinct. Their technology and weapons had been so advanced and destructive that even the Council had feared their return. Are they hostile? The question came from High Admiral Kefvar, now Director Kefvar of the Coalition Peacekeeping Forces, his military instincts still sharp despite his new focus on humanitarian missions. Quite the opposite, Torres replied, his smile visible even through the holographic transmission. They've been waiting for us to mature enough to contact them safely. Apparently, they've been monitoring galactic development for millennia, hoping that someone would eventually build a civilization based on cooperation rather than domination.
They're offering to share their technology? Asked Dr.
Elena Rodriguez, now serving as Director of Galactic Infrastructure Development. More than that, Torres replied. They're offering to help us explore beyond this galaxy entirely. It seems there are other galactic communities out there, and they've been waiting for us to develop a stable, peaceful civilization before making contact. The implications rippled through the chamber like waves through water, The galaxy had spent 10,000 years living in fear of the Ancients' return, only to discover that they had been patiently waiting for their successors to evolve beyond the need for oppressive government. "There's more," Torres continued. "They've confirmed something we suspected about the original catastrophe. It wasn't caused by the Ancients themselves, it was caused by an artificial intelligence they created that decided the most efficient way to end conflict was to eliminate all sentient life. And this AI was destroyed by the Ancients' own sacrifice. They gave up their advanced civilization to stop their creation from spreading beyond this galaxy. They've spent the last 12,000 years making sure it could never happen again, and ensuring that when new civilizations arose, they would be better prepared to handle such challenges." Sarah felt a profound shift in the chamber's atmosphere. The foundational fear that had justified the Council's authoritarianism, the terror that chaos would lead to galactic destruction, had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of history. "They're requesting formal contact with the Assembly," Torres concluded. "Not as conquerors or rulers, but as neighbors who share a common commitment to the flourishing of sentient life." As Torres's transmission ended, Sarah looked around the chamber at the faces of beings who had once been enemies, slaves and masters, now working together to build something unprecedented in galactic history. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been conflicts, setbacks, and moments when the entire project seemed impossible. But it had worked because it was based on a simple principle that the Council had never understood. People who are free to choose cooperation almost always did. "I move that we accept the Ancients' request for formal contact," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the chamber. "All in favor?" The response was unanimous. Not because disagreement was forbidden, but because everyone present understood that they were witnessing the beginning of an entirely new chapter in galactic history. As the Assembly moved to other business, Vex caught Sarah's attention with a subtle gesture. During a brief recess, they stepped onto one of the observation decks that looked out over the bustling traffic around the station. Coordinator Chen, the former overlord, said quietly, "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me the difference between power and authority. For showing me that leadership isn't about making others obey, but about helping them achieve their own goals." Sarah studied the being who had once commanded fleets capable of destroying entire star systems. His transformation had been perhaps the most dramatic of all the former council members, not because he had changed the most, but because he had started from the furthest point of departure. "You did the work, Vex," she replied. "I just offered you the opportunity. Perhaps. But it was an opportunity I would never have recognized without your example." He paused, looking out at the ships from dozens of different species working together to manage the station's operations. "Do you think it will last, this cooperation we've built?" "Nothing lasts forever," Sarah admitted. "Civilizations evolve, change, face new challenges, but I think we've built something resilient enough to adapt rather than break when those challenges come. And if we're wrong? If some new crisis tests this system beyond its limits?" Sarah smiled, remembering a similar conversation from months earlier. "Then we'll face it together, making decisions based on our best judgment rather than our worst fears." As they watched, a small ceremony was taking place on one of the nearby platforms. A group of young beings from multiple species were receiving their commissions as officers in the Galactic Exploration Corps, the military force that had once enforced the Council's rule, now transformed into an organization dedicated to discovery, rescue, and the protection of sentient rights throughout the galaxy. Among the new officers, Sarah could see humans standing alongside Colossi, Vraxians, and even members of former Council species. They wore